Hey, Tarek, welcome to R4E, and I appreciate you hopping on today.
Arjan, it's always a pleasure, man. Great to speak with you.
Of course, I just cut you off because I wanted to save the meat and potatoes of our conversation because we were just diving into our backstory together. But before we jump into that, your walk-up song was the intro to Childish Gambino's Freaks and Geeks. Can you tell me why that song's important to you or why that intro is important to you? And we'll go from there.
Absolutely, man. I mean, I think it's just been the one song that's kind of hyped me up for everything in my life to this point, right? I mean, I used to listen to that song before big soccer games back in high school, actually tests before college, pre-games and parties, obviously in college as well. And then, later on job interviews and then finally the first date of my girlfriend, was sitting in the car. I'm like, come on, you got to get something going. And even before this, so it's kind of been a staple. And it just really gets me in the zone.
It's cool that song's transcended with you through all those different times. And I'm interested to hear in a couple of years if that kind of stays with you. Wherever your life goes, if it's like you're walking into a big pitch meeting or you're walking into your future wife having a kid, you have that song playing in an AirPod or something. But look, it's great to reconnect with you. We were just talking about how our paths crossed when you were in the 8th grade and I was in the 7th grade. And maybe we have that as the tipping off point, but get me up to speed there. I know you grew up in the DC area, but for everyone that doesn't have a chance to know you, maybe you give everyone the quick background of Tarek in a nutshell, and we can jump into our 7th, 8th grade overlap.
Absolutely. Well, I think the most defining factor about myself is my name, right? So, but people see me and they're like, "Oh, you're not American." They see my name, they're like, "How are you? Who you are?" So I'm, child of 2 immigrants. My mom is from the UK, which is kind of how I get the way I look, and then my dad's actually from the Middle East. And I think the best part and the best way to sum me up is kind of growing up in that household, especially in Northern Virginia. One thing that is different was they always pushed me to progress, never to be perfect. And so kind of grew up in average, standard, middle-class home. My parents didn't really know the ins and outs of the competitiveness in Northern Virginia. They were just kind of happy that I was in school, I was doing all right, I had good friends. And I guess I really was lucky for that. I got some really a great support system around me, and then ended up going to JMU after high school. But even before that, obviously got to meet you in the hallways of Longfellow and trekked through McLean. And, it's been a wild ride, but that's kind of the spark notes, if you will, up until this point.
There's plenty to tackle there. Let's start back at Longfellow. So I remember, to your point, I was thinking back before we were filming this, where we first met. I thought it was a photojournalism class, but you said it before we started filming. It was speech arts appreciation, I think is the actual class it was. You were in 8th grade, I was in 7th grade. I remember you always used to wear a soccer jersey, and I don't want to get at what the team you support wrong, but we always had a bit of overlap because there was the World Cup that year too. When I was in 7th grade, it was the Shakira Waka World Cup in South Africa, the big deal.
Great memory, man. Great memory. Yeah.
So I remember because you were that was when England and US played each other, I think, maybe, if I remember correctly. So we had that overlap of both of us passionate about soccer, but we had speech arts together, and you completely jumped. I remember we were just running around the halls. They gave us I think they gave us video cameras to go and like film different stuff, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, you nailed it. It was 2010. It was the second semester of my 8th grade year, second semester of your 7th grade year. And it was you, me, and then Brian Henderson was the third. And we were kind of this like little trifecta of trouble rolling around the hallways. And what's the best part is, like, I really just don't think that our teacher cared at the time that we weren't really getting much done. And you're right. I wore a soccer jersey almost every day. I was that kid. I always tried to make it fashionable. It probably never was. And I'm a big Man United fan, diehard fan. So mom's side of the family is actually from primarily London. We have bits and pieces up in towards Liverpool, Manchester, and I kind of fell the way of my granddad, who's from Newcastle. So I fell in love with David Beckham and that team back in the late 90s. And yeah, it's been part of my blood ever since. And you're right, actually, to kind of give you your trivia cred here. England, US were in the same group in 2010. I think England went through first. Let's go. And the US went through second. So yeah, 100%.
I remember between you on one shoulder and my friend and who ended up becoming my college roommate, Matthew Grocock, who's a big England fan too. So I was hearing it from both of you guys when those games were going on. But it's so funny, kind of painting the picture for everyone else in this speech arts class. The idea of it was just to kind of, I think it was like, honestly, maybe there was some inspiration to get this podcast started from that class, because it's all about like documenting and creating interesting audio, video kind of overlap for folks. And we were like going around documenting different stuff around school. And to your point about not having any supervision in class, it was when our school was getting renovated too. So there was a lot of like random like trailers and nooks and crannies that we were just like going and filming random stuff for. But that's so fun. I have not thought about that class in a long time. So too funny that you jogged my memory there. But
it was a great, honestly, it was such a freeing, part of the day. If you think about it, right, in middle school particularly, it's a pretty jarring environment. This was back when we had, I think it was 7-8 classes a day.
Yeah.
8 classes a day. How insane is that? You're making a 13-year-old who's not getting enough sleep sit through 8 classes in a day. Having one where you're able to run around for 45 minutes, honestly, it was the best thing ever. And like, I think it was just, I really appreciated it looking back at it. I really did, because it was giving us that kind of creative expression to kind of look at our school the way, like through our eyes, as opposed to maybe getting a faculty email or whatever it might have been. So I think it was a cool showcase that.
I wonder if our footage from that class exists anywhere on some hard drive in a dumpster somewhere.
So, what's actually so funny is I actually went back to Longfellow, I want to say my junior year of college. So this is probably like 2017. And this was the summer, and I just went back and said hi to some people. And I ran into my old science teacher, Mr. Reed. I don't know if
oh my gosh, yeah, I remember Mr. Reed.
Yeah. So we had a project, and this is, we're talking 8 years prior, a project for, you basically were given a periodic element on the chart, and you had to come up with a skit, something to basically teach the class about how, like, what is this element? And I was given boron, which is, what the hell is that, right? Like, and I remember I associated, because you're a kid, boron, Borat, and I literally did the entire presentation in a Borat accent, and he to this day told me that he still shows his kids that video. So it was a cool moment to kind of go back and be like, hey, I'm an adult now, and what's up?
Functioning adult in society who has that. Yeah. Too funny. I forgot about Mr. Reed. Wow, this is gonna give me weird dreams for a couple of days, having all these memories running up. But so I want to dive in a little further too. So your mom's from Manchester. Where in the Middle East is your dad from?
Yeah, no, actually, so my mom is from the south part of London, but yes, all England, same thing. And my dad is he's Jordanian. So the cool thing about my parents is that I really appreciate their background. They actually came out of not the best situations. My mom, lower middle class British family. And it's kind of a place where, not a lot of the family leaves. She actually got a scholarship out as a nurse and wanted to become she joined a travel program, and she was able to live all around the world and kind of experience different cultures, meet new people. And she was the adventurous one of her side of the family and really kind of pushed those limits. And then my father was one of 9, the youngest of 9. And, same thing kind of with him, went to school in the US at 17 years old, learned English, everything. And then they ended up in the DC area. My dad now is and has been an entrepreneur. He's really kind of paved his own path through time. And my mom is still a nurse to this day, loves her job, been at her hospital, George Washington University Hospital, for 30 years. And it was a really incredible household to grow up in, now that I kind of look back and think about it, because everything was very raw. It wasn't kind of paved before me. It was very like, dad got here on his own, mom got here on her own. It's time for you to figure it out. So it was.
And how they meet?
So yeah, this is the best story ever, honestly, for anyone listening to this. My mom actually was on a travel program, her final rotation in Saudi Arabia on an US Army base. And she was doing some work over there. And my dad was actually hired by the US Army as an engineer. So one night they're out off base at a party. And as for any of you guys who know that part of the Middle East, it's drinking, partying, very, very frowned upon, not legal in the slightest. And so the story goes, My mom is drunk on a car, screaming, trying to find her friends because the cops had just been called and are on their way. My dad's running with his friends at the time, sees this very blonde lady just standing on a car yelling for her friends. And he's like, what are you doing? Like, we have to go. And eventually they kind of run away, hide together. And my dad, being the bold guy that he is, asked my mom for her number. My mom, being the very independent, strong lady that she is, told him absolutely not. And they actually ended up running into each other 2 months after that at a mutual friend's barbecue. And my dad, again, being the bold guy that he is, goes, remember me? Want to get dinner? She said, all right. They were married 9 months later. And that's it.
That is crazy. That is absolutely crazy. Was that barbecue in the middle? Was it in Saudi Arabia or was it back?
Yeah, it was a going away barbecue for a close friend of theirs on the base. And so that's kind of the story I've been told. I've told it to many people and they're like, wow, that should be like a movie. I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm over here like, yeah, I met my girlfriend through mutual friends. So, not the same like spark, but
I was gonna ask, it's hard to top that though. That really sounds like a part of a movie script.
It was, yeah. I mean, it's like, how does anyone follow that up? So, oh man, good. It's, yeah, they've and they're still great friends to this day. It's just it was a really cool place to grow up with them and kind of learn a lot of their perspectives. And when they were raising me too, it was, a lot of the time it was, hey, just remember when I was a kid, and this wasn't even out of guilt. It was very much like, hey, just be thankful for what you have. You are in a great part. You have these opportunities. Make sure you take them. And that was always the sentiment in my household.
I just knowing you and keeping up over the last, however long we've known each other now, since 13, 14 years. I mean, you're definitely want to do that. You mentioned your dad being very entrepreneurial. I'm assuming you got some of that entrepreneurial spirit from him. Maybe let's get the audience up to speed over what the last couple of years has held for you. So you graduated from JMU, spent some time in consulting, jumped to a couple of different shops, but what stands out for you the last couple of years and your kind of ebbs and flows through corporate America and into a couple of different startup journeys for you?
Yeah, and I'll take you back really to kind of where it all started. Yeah, it wasn't, but I'll keep it pretty clean of the last couple of years. You graduate college and I'm in consulting, and I think the best thing that I learned in the last couple of years was around relationship building and just kind of the people you meet, the hands you shake. And that was always my dad's piece of advice to me every time I'd stress out over grades or something. He's like, hey, listen, it's never the grades you make, it's the hands you shake. And, I think in my first job, I was actually super lucky because I got the best manager I've had to date. Him and I are still friends. And that's a testament more so to him than to myself, because, he really, he keeps up with me and he wants me in his life. And that for me is such an encouraging environment for a kid out of college who has no idea what the professional world holds, to really meet somebody who wants to take them in and show them the ropes, more so than just not only in a professional sense, but in a social sense, and it was a really great foundation to kind of work from. But going back, yeah, my dad, he came to the US when he was young. He got his degree. He's worked all over the world. He got a job with his brother, and then in government contracting of sorts. And then he decided to open up his own shop because he was like, listen, I can do this. Like I have the ability to do it. And he wanted the autonomy, but he also knew that, and he believed in himself. And I think the best part about that whole story is, he quit his job and he went home to my mom, and my mom had just had me. And, they weren't making the best money in the world. And my mom looked at him and said, all right, let's do it. So he set up an office in the bedroom and, worked it up into an office eventually in McLean. And, and now he's still doing it today. And I think that kind of, I guess growing up, it was really cool to kind of have someone who looked at the world and said, I want to eat what I kill, in a weird way, but more so he always preaches the autonomy it gave him and the life that it was able to give him. And more so than not, the belief that he had in himself is just, it's inspiring to me. And, it's not something that I actually found in consulting. And I've always just kind of, I've hopped around. I got into product management, and I know there are other people on this podcast that are like, yeah, I've done this and this and this. And so, yeah, I was a data scientist, was in the consulting field for that, data engineering, analytics, got a little bit too technical for me. So I moved into product management, and that was a little bit too hands-off in a weird way, because, when you're at American Express in a bank, it stuff tends to already be built. So
Right.
For me, I kind of scaled back in the last few years, and I'm back in the analytics field. So I'm on a phenomenal insights and analytics team at a company called Yext. And that's kind of what my professional side has looked like, for sure. Until I'd say about a year ago, I started toying around with the idea of starting my own thing. And so that's kind of where you find me today. I'm on my second startup. And happy to dive into that.
Let me pause there, because I want to tackle, you mentioned analytics side of it. And I remember a couple of years ago, I don't remember the timing, so get me up to speed maybe here, but seeing your Tableau by Tarek, I think is what you called it back then. I don't know if you're still doing that at all, but those visualizations that you put together, and I'll plug the link in the show notes, because I remember seeing it, and I was blown away with how cool that was. But maybe for folks that haven't seen or heard of that you put together, do you get people up to speed on what that tool is?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tableau is a data visualization tool. And what that basically means is, if your company, if you have, I'll use the example that I did with Tableau Tarek, right? Because it's sports stats. And, you had kind of alluded to it earlier on, a massive sports data guy. I probably rely on it too heavily when I'm, trying to predict games or do whatever, or fantasy football. But, for me, all that stuff is open source, right? So I can grab that from ESPN. I can grab that from, even now the sports gambling websites are offering that up, and
interesting.
And it's kind of free to use. So what Tableau does is it takes that data and it kind of allows you to play around with it and manipulate it in a way that paints a picture, right, of like, what does it mean? So especially when you're storytelling to people like a C-suite or even clients, right? And they want to see, okay, we see that we have X% of, conversion rates on certain product or whatever. But to a lot of people, that doesn't actually mean something if you're not seeing where it stacks up against another product, right? So you might say, hey, we have 52% conversion on this product and then 80% on this product. And if there are two bars right here and you're seeing that this one is absolutely crushing it, it's just so much easier for the user to kind of look over it and be like, okay, so what my decision is that we should probably, double down on the higher revenue product.
Right.
Product. And yeah, so that's kind of what Tableau is. I did that for sports data. I did it. I think what happened was in January of 2020, Kobe Bryant died. And that was one of the saddest days in sports. I think it was just an incredibly sad day all around for his family and the rest of the US, who's kind of grown up with him as a huge figure. And kind of as a tribute to him, I kind of went digging through his data just to kind of see what was his greatness. I wanted to kind of relive it, and I saw it, and I kind of saw the trend over time, right? I mean, as an athlete, and you had these games like his 81 points against the Toronto Raptors, and then you had his last 60-point game, and I thought that the best way to really showcase all of that was in this bubble of all bubbles, right? So I basically plotted every single game by point size. I put it up online, and overnight it kind of just caught fire. An NBA account picked it up. I was on Reddit. It kind of really took off on Tableau Public, which is kind of like the Instagram of Tableau dashboards.
Right.
Super nerd status, that it kind of got some traction there too. And it kind of made me realize that it's, for people who might not be as data centric, it's a really cool way to introduce, that side of things and a little bit more digestible. So that's kind of what I did.
And to paint the picture, this wasn't just like wasn't just like a bar chart or some sort of bubble graph. This was a mosaic theory of Kobe shooting, if I remember correctly, right? Like it was Kobe taking a shot, and it was a mosaic visualization of like bubbles that was based off of his points that put together an image of him shooting with the data I'm like, to your point, I mean, there's a reason why I took that. That was pretty wicked. I think there's definitely a lot of tailwinds recognized just from the timing of it and to your point, the gravity of his death. But really, really cool. And so that obviously is a passion, because that was not for anything other than you were just nerding out over stats and graphs. And so that probably leads to kind of the entrepreneurial spirit that you have in you. How did that kind of bleed into, or did you think about monetizing that at all, or starting anything up off of that? Because to your point, it picked up a lot of traction. Did you ever think about using that, or did that kind of stay in kind of the professional landscape of your skill set?
I think that the thing that a lot of people who are getting into entrepreneurship will tell you is that, like, don't look for a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, right? So for me, I actually never thought to try to monetize this or do anything. I was just really enjoying myself. I was having fun. Like, I was hand drawing the mosaics, and I was kind of scratching a creative itch in me, especially during a time. I actually did this predominantly through COVID. So it's through a time where I was kind of feeling trapped in my house, and it was an outlet, and it was really a way for me to share my passion of sports and the thing I got a kick out of, and and also introduce it to people who really just appreciated kind of looking at a pretty picture for a second, but then also kind of showcasing the other side of that, which was cool. And I guess to kind of my entrepreneurial spirit, funny enough, probably started from way too young of an age. Like, I used to stand, you can talk about lemonade stands and stuff, but like, I remember that, there would be relatives that would stay in my house when I was like a kid. I was like 6, 7 years old. I would turn my house into a hotel, and I would try to upsell them on like water bottles. I would be like, they would be like, yeah, so I can bring you up water to your room or towels or whatever. And then I would try to get like tips. I'd be like, yeah, it's like $1, $2, and little things like that. I remember one summer, me and a friend in the neighborhood, we created a bike repair shop for kids our age who wanted to stop by and, get their bikes fixed by kids the same age as them. And nobody really needed it. But we tried. And then I think the breakthrough for me with entrepreneurship came in high school. So you might not, this was a very underground thing, so I don't know if it made it out to to other grades or whatever. But myself and three of my friends, we created this thing called the Yeasty Boys, and what that was is it was our own homebrew. And the way that started was so senior year going into high school, I was 17. And I was a tall kid, right? I probably looked the oldest of all of us. So I was first up to bat and getting a fake ID. And so I got a fake ID, and I bought it with, I think it was 1.2 Bitcoin that fake ID cost me at the time. And I got it. And the whole goal was for my friends and I, we were like, yeah, like, we're going to throw these parties like at my friend's house. At the time, his dad was leaving town every other weekend to go see his girlfriend, Marilyn. And so we had this perfect 2-week cadence that we would throw these parties. And I remember, I used to go out and buy the beer, and we would spend all our own money. And the hardest thing about throwing a party in high school is always collecting the money for the beer, right? Because it's like, you never, how are you going to do that? Like, people just come in, you don't have someone at the door. That's good. And you feel kind of weird, right? So basically for the first month we did this, 2 months we did this, we ended up being out like $200, $300 in beer. And, you remember being 17.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money, dude. Like, I don't have that money. Like, I know I worked as a waiter at a Chinese restaurant for a second. I was a delivery driver. I coached soccer and tennis, but like, I didn't have that money. And so basically my friends and I were like, how do we come up with a more efficient way of doing this? And funny enough, I'll give you the rundown of who those 3 friends are. One is in med school. One is got a master's in astrophysics. That's Brian, by the way. And one is a cancer chemist. So, these guys are they're not idiots, right? So we kind of looked around, and one had been on a Reddit thread, and they're like, we can actually create our own, alcohol with apple juice. And so we tried it. We messed around with some recipes and everything. And I think the best part about that was, like, I was kind of bringing in the people to the party, right? And basically I was now floor operator. I would collect $5 at the door, but we have this homebrew instead of instead of beer. The homebrew was coming in at around 10, 11%. The recipe was perfect, but our cost for all of the homebrew was probably $2 a bottle. And so we, for the last semester and a half of high school, maybe a little less, we're actually getting paid to party with our friends. And that was called the Yeasty Boys.
It's scratching it. I feel like I vaguely remember hearing about that, but it sounded more like mythical to the juniors more than anything else. But that's pretty crazy and interesting combination of folks too, with the astrophysicist and the cancer chemist, and that's pretty crazy.
I mean, it's those guys are my best friends, really. I mean, we've kind of known each other from grade school. We were always trying stupid stuff. We were never going to be, the people that just kept buying the beer. And it was more so an experiment for us more than anything. Obviously we drank the stuff ourselves first before we gave it to anyone else to make sure that it was great. And it was just an unreal story. I remember we told our parents that like a few years ago, because obviously you don't tell them when you're still living in their house. Yeah. But, and they were just like, what the hell? Like, that is so elaborate. And I guess from there, I've always been kind of looking for a next Yeasty Boys to kind of follow.
Yeah, and for the record, Mom and Dad, I know you're listening, and I did not attend any Yeasty Boys activities.
I vouch for. I vouch. He was, yeah. We never get into trouble.
That is too funny. That is too funny. So I mean, like, jokes aside, I mean, very not an easy operation for a handful of different reasons. There's obviously some parallels into your current venture that I can just pull from right here, but I want to talk about Den, if you don't mind, because I thought that idea was really novel. And I know there's a couple of kind of similar businesses out there like that, but maybe get me up to speed. My guess here, and tell me if I'm wrong, is post-pandemic, world opens back up. You're in the busiest, craziest city in the world. Did you feel like there was a need for this, to your point earlier about don't find a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, or don't work for a solution for a problem that doesn't exist? Was this a problem for you? And maybe you can get everyone up to speed on what that business did.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, you nailed it, right? Biggest city in the world, world's coming back. That was the crux of the motivation, right? And to answer your question about, was there a problem that we were having, right? So my girlfriend and I, we were traveling abroad. We were in Stockholm, and it was a weird day in the fall where it was like, those days where it's like 30 degrees in the morning and then it's 60 in the afternoon and then it's like 20 again. And you know what I'm saying? It's like, you can't really guess the weather. And so we're walking around, and it just happened to be like an unseasonably warm day. And we're walking to dinner, and my girlfriend looks at me. She's like, I just don't want to carry this coat with me anymore, but I know I'm going to need it. And this sucks. And so that's where it really came from. It was like, well, yeah, like, why isn't there a place that we could store this? And, you mentioned that there are other solutions out there. And the thing that they're really gauged for was luggage. So a lot of these companies have partnered with, think like 7-Elevens, just kind of really conveniently placed locations, but the one thing that they haven't nailed down is the psychology of the sale, right? Because you have a personal item that you value, and are you going to feel comfortable handing it to a 7-Eleven for $5, right? Like, that was what just never made sense. And they couldn't even do it for things like coats or a backpack. It was only suitcases. And so Den was the idea of linking people to hotel chains, right? Like hotels with extra space. You've already trust hotels with lodging and security. It's an easy bridge. It's a brand that but also, especially in a city like New York, it is, they have the most space as far as any kind of business in the city, right? I mean, they have extra rooms. And to really dive further into it in New York, at peak COVID levels, occupancy got down to as little as 10%, right? And that 10% was actually government, contracts with essentially the state government that helped shelter homeless people. So it wasn't even true residents. And there were, you have a staff that has to clean these rooms, and they were cutting people left and right because they were at what they call a supply lag. And what that means is that they were actually only open to like 50% capacity. 60% capacity, 70, because they truly didn't have the staff to like operate and clean and upkeep with these rooms. So our solution was, we're going to go to these hotels, partner with them, and utilize any extra space they have for actually this short-term storage. Think about it, coming COVID, kind of this resurgence of people coming back and traveling in places like New York. At its peak, New York had 50 million people coming in, and it was an idea where if you hit this right of like tourism is now roaring back, but hotels have yet to really, get to that max capacity and utilize that. And they can kind of create almost a side hustle out of storing bags and coats and whatnot, then we might have a business on our hands. And so that's what the premise of Den was. I built it out with a team of 4 guys. We got interviewed by Y Combinator, which was a really cool experience. It was insanely intimidating, but and inevitably the reason why we actually stopped was because the problem was too big for my first startup, and I had to acknowledge that. I had to almost like take that on as like it wasn't a failure, right? But I had to realize that I've never been in an operating position like this where, if this is going to work, this has to work in New York, and I have to talk to the hotel unions, and I have to bridge gaps with individual staff, and I have to train people on how to actually do this. And on top of that, we're developing an app. So we developed the app and we sold it around, and we got about 10 to 15 hotels on the platform or committed to the platform, right? And
right.
Inevitably it took a toll on my mental health, where I was so stressed out about trying to solve five angles of one problem. And inevitably I told my team, I was like, guys, I can't, this isn't the way I can do, like, I can't do this right now. Like, this isn't the way to go about this. And if I were to force it, like I said, right, if I was to force it through, I don't know if the product would have been good. And at the time it kind of crossed paths with this other startup that I'm also happy to tell you about, but it was more so me acknowledging that it wasn't the right time for me to tackle that problem.
Yeah. Before we dive into your current venture, what was I guess the 2 questions for you here, like one of which I'd be curious what your Y Combinator experience is like, because it's kind of this ethereal, crazy kind of goal to tackle for any startup or any entrepreneur. But so I'd love to hear that. And then what was that like processing from not your ego, but the classical sense ego perspective of digesting, like, hey, this is a startup that I've dedicated so much time and effort to, and I'm going to have to take a step away from this. I'd love to kind of dive into those 2 things before we round out.
No, yeah. So Y Combinator was a crazy experience because when I first started Den, this was March of 2020. We had gone through so many peaks and valleys. So like, it was, I'd gone through a couple of co-founders who had started with me and then inevitably had to step away. And I was on my own, and then I rebuilt the team. And in that chaos of trying to figure out who this team was going to be to build this with me, I submitted an application. Well, it's not really an application. And for anyone who wants or is interested in entrepreneurship, I could not stress or recommend this enough. It's called Startup School, and it's by Y Combinator. And all you have to do is create a profile, and they'll do a quick scan on like, okay, is this person real? Yeah, okay. And then you basically put into an 8-week or 6-week course where you're joining via Zoom or whatever live sessions taught by Y Combinator partners, from anything from what makes a good startup idea to how to raise funding or how to price your product, what does go to market look like. And it was really informative for me. And, I sat in on every class. I remember I'd sneak away to sometimes to a conference room and just kind of listen in. Right. And it was a really cool forum. And I remember Labor Day of last year, right. I was away in Rhode Island with some friends, and we were just hanging out, and I got an email at 11:30 at night. And it was from a YC partner. And he was like, hey, we've recognized you and your idea as a top 10% applicant. Like, we highly encourage you to apply to YC. And I showed this to my girlfriend in bed. I'm like, what is happening right now? And for anyone who doesn't know the Y Combinator deal, if you apply and get into Y Combinator, they give you, I think it's like $500,000 for what ends up being about 7% of your company. And they funded Airbnb, Stripe, Coinbase, like some of the biggest companies in the world. And so it's kind of like your Harvard of startup, right? The startup world. And so yeah, I sent in an application. I had to do a video, I had to do all this stuff, and we ended up getting an interview. And that interview was insane. It's a 10-minute cut interview. So it's like rapid fire, man. They sit you down. They're just like, what's your plan for this? How have you gotten to this point? Who does this? Who does this? And they try to evaluate the worth of your startup in 10 minutes. And you had 10 minutes to basically sell yourself that you are worthy of $500,000 for 7% of your company. And we did not get it, unfortunately, but super proud of us for even getting an interview, and just taking it that far. And it was crazy. And I think the second question that you mentioned, right, was kind of dealing with the startup, kind of acknowledging that maybe this isn't it. And I'll keep it short because I know I've been rambling here for a second, but
that's good, man.
The one thing that I think growing up in, and I'm not sitting here complaining about growing up in Northern Virginia, trust me, but the one thing that I think is tough, and I think a lot of people from our area will resonate with, is that we are not taught to fail at all. Failure is not an option. And, especially when you are kind of putting yourself out into the world with an idea that is 100% yours, it's your name that goes down with it, right? And it's kind of allowing yourself that space to be like, hey, it's okay if I am not the next Bezos, if I'm not the next, X CEO, name this founder, whatever. It's and maybe this isn't the idea, right? And I don't think that we are taught well to do that. We're not taught well to acknowledge and kind of, pick up our stuff and go home sometimes. And that was what I had to really come to. So I sat and I talked with a lot of people. I kind of sat with myself for a while, and I was like, okay, well, did kind of a cost benefit analysis. Like, am I going to be able to give this my all? Am I not going to be, like, what are the pros and cons? And yeah, it was a tough decision. And to make it even more real, I announced it on LinkedIn, just to kind of tell everyone, like, hey, listen, I'm not this guy that, is going from next to next to next to next, right? It's like, I'm not just cruising up the ladder here. Like, there are going to be some setbacks. This is a setback. And yeah, and it was a humbling moment, but it was something I needed to do.
I mean, obviously, this being the Reason for Everything podcast, I've heard an interesting quote before where it's something along the lines of, things don't happen to you, they happen for you. And again, the same kind of realm of why I care about this platform. I care about the idea of there being a reason for everything. So that said, I mean, did that experience then help you in any way recognize this opportunity with Hooli? If I'm getting the name correct, is it Hooli, the current startup venture?
Yeah, it is. And I think the best thing, I'm sorry, choked on some water. I'm terrible at that. But I think the best thing about Hooli is that it's such a simple idea, and it's so easy to tell somebody, hey, this is what we're doing. And for those listening, so Hooli is it's an app that basically gets you that reservation alerts for really hard to get restaurants in New York City. So, to kind of paint the picture of like what the problem is, New York City, like, food is it's the social capital, right? Like, you do everything around food, and there's a massive scene for it. And, you have obviously your good places, and you have your little mom and pop shops. And then somewhere all the way up here in this realm on top of a mountain are these select few restaurants that are known worldwide. Maybe they have the best chef, maybe they are TikTok famous, maybe they are whatever, and you literally just, for the life of you, cannot, unless you know somebody, find a way to get into this restaurant. And to give you the totem pole of what the New York landscape is for reservations, you know somebody, so you're either famous or you have an in. you are a part of things like a members club. So think of like a country club that has partnerships with all of these different restaurants, and you can pay hundreds of dollars up front, you know, for a table on this platform. Then you have things like, you know, reservation bots that are going in and stealing all these reservations to then next tier down resell on platforms like their reseller platforms. Imagine it's like eBay for reservations for hundreds of dollars. And then finally, when you get down to the last piece is where you find OpenTable and Resi. And the issue is that people think that OpenTable and Resi is like, this is it. This is how you get a reservation. When in reality, what they don't realize is that they're actually bottom of the barrel consumers. And our whole idea is we're trying to, so we built an AI that actually will notify you at the same speed as something like a reservation bot, and allows you to take action with your own OpenTable and Resi account. Basically in a way that's going to give you a chance to get in. And because I personally don't think, I like food. My girlfriend's a foodie. All of my friends, we love going and trying these places. It's not fair that these restaurants are kind of withheld to the 1%. We want to give them back to the normal person who just likes to go and actually experience the city that they live in. And that's really why we've built what we've built. And for me, it's such an easy pitch just to tell people, hey, we're just giving reservations back. That's it.
It's the Robin Hood of reservations.
Yeah, someone said that. And yeah, we try to. We also want to make sure that people know that, you know, we don't guarantee you a reservation. You know, the system, we're not out here correcting everything that's right and wrong with the system, but I think we're giving people a better chance. And I think that's the important thing.
So what's the model look like? If I'm listening to this podcast, I hear about Hooli. How do I sign up? What do I get from it? What does that all look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, right now we're actually in early access. So we're not actually on the App Store just yet. You can download our prototype that's called Test Flight. It's Apple's kind of beta testing, software. And the model is basically, it's just an app. So you go on and you have the list of all the restaurants. And what we try to do is we tried to add an element of transparency to it. So like, for example, right now, if you went on Resi or OpenTable, you'll just see tables that are either open, or you'll see a restaurant and that says we have no availability at this time, right? And you can set an alert. But what you don't know is, well, how many tables have actually been open? Like, do I actually have a chance, or am I just setting an alert to get nothing, right? And so what we try to do is we actually give a number of how many tables we found that week. So if it's less than 10, realistically, yeah, okay, you're not going to get that table. But, for some people who aren't seeing these tables online, right, or they might get, maybe someone cancels and then they pop up for like half a second, like we are able to actually show that, no, there's availability. It's just not in front of you. And that way you can actually set these alerts for multiple places. You can set them for multiple party sizes. And we're trying to make it as flexible as possible for the user to really go and just enjoy a meal, man. It's just dinner. It's not that deep.
I'm excited. I'm not the biggest foodie, but just I'm up to date with the struggles, the trials and tribulations that foodies go through just to get a reservation. And even the DC food scene compared to New York is totally different, but I'm up to speed. And I think it's a really cool idea. What are you most excited for in this journey? Obviously, again, this isn't your first startup. What are you most excited for in this journey? What's coming down the pike that you're itching to tackle next?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, what I love about this is I'm failing publicly. I think that's the fun thing, right? Is like, at least for this startup, it's not as much of a failure, but I'm just, it gets me out of my comfort zone a little bit. I think that, working in corporate, sometimes we are confined to our little bubbles, and, we kind of move around, and especially, you see things with like the layoffs that are happening right now, and everything seems so safe until it's not, right? And I what I love about building, right, like Hooli and building it so publicly is that, I'm learning as I go, and I get to share that with people. And I think coming down the line, I'm just really excited to kind of tone my voice a little bit to say like, hey, like this is this is what this product is, and you know, this is the impact that it can have for you. And because right now, the one thing I am terrible at is coming up with ways to market and talk about this. So really learning how to take a product to market, really learning how to value it, really learning how to interact and engage directly and build a product for a customer, not build a solution I think will serve a customer. I think that's the number one thing that, you know, all entrepreneurs, you know, I think everyone thinks that they have an answer. And if I were to learn something from my last one, it's get it. It doesn't matter how, you know, it doesn't matter how good you think your solution is, get it in front of people as fast as possible, because they will rip it apart, and you will come back and you will have a better product because of them. And that's been our biggest win, I think, so far.
It's crazy. I feel like that's the modern day entrepreneur, the modern day builders MO. And I always see it on socials is like, for all the builders build folks, that's all about like, hey, get to market as fast as you can so people can tear it apart and give suggestions, versus I feel like a decade ago or in the 2000s, it was you hold it in stealth as long as possible, and then you come out with this big massive product launch, 98 Windows style, and it's like, hey, here's this big tool. But nowadays, it's because it's so saturated, because there's so many quick ways to go to market. I feel like it's so true that you have to get out there as soon as possible to allow for folks to give you the feedback, which is, again, probably the hardest part about it, about even for me getting this podcast up and running, or for an entrepreneur such as yourself getting the product out, is just knowing that, hey, once out there, there's plenty of critics and plenty of folks that are willing to share their opinion for better and for worse.
And that's the thing, right? Is like, you know, and that's what I meant earlier about, you know, learning how to fail, you know. So I think the number one thing, especially if you're going into entrepreneurship, but even if you are where you are, even if you're just thinking about it, even if you're just like at a job, you know, it's okay, you know. And I think like it's about embracing that side of you and learning that maybe you're just not designed to be this perfect robot, you know. And I'll tell you a story going back to college real quick. So, you know, when I was in college, especially like we already talked about it, right? Coming from Northern Virginia, you know, you go on through to university, and you cruise in and you're expecting that, oh yeah, this is going to be great. We're going to kill it. We're going to get all the A's, and we're going to move on. We're going to get a job. And, I had a really rough first semester of my sophomore year of college. I had a really rough time mentally. I was struggling with some mental health issues, and you know, I just, for the life of me, I couldn't get myself out of a rut. You know, I was probably doing all the wrong things. I was trying to cover that up with going out and partying, and I was trying to go and do well in school, and it wasn't working. And I remember that at the end of my sophomore year, or not sophomore year, my first semester sophomore year, going into Christmas, I got a 2.1 GPA that semester. And what that meant for me was I needed to come back second semester and get a 3.6 to get into the business school for my junior year of college. And I sat with myself. It was a real rock bottom moment where I was like, what is happening? And I sat with and I opened up with my parents. I'm like, listen, this isn't who I am. And I'm hurting here. And it was about acknowledging that I wasn't okay, to then be able to come back the next semester. I got a 3.62, so I actually did it. But then I needed to take one more class in the summer. And that class, for any of you JMU folks, if you're listening, is 291 with Ping Wang. And you know, and I was told, they're like, dude, this is gonna be a slog. It's a Maymester class. You're gonna be in Harrisonburg on your own. You know, you're gonna need to really buckle down here. And I needed a B+ in that class to get into the business school for the fall. And I remember I sat in Ping Wang's after hours, office hours, right, every day after class. I tried my best to really like understand the subject matter. And I think the best part about it is when I kind of mentioned earlier about relationship building, and it's about the hands you shake. Like, I didn't sit there and just, you know, talk 290, like, you know, I think the class was some data centric class, but it was like, you know, I didn't just sit there and talk that class with him. I asked him about like his day and like, you know, what he did. And I learned that he got up every day at 6 a.m. and went and swam laps at the pool. And his wife was, you know, so annoyed that he sets his alarm for 5:30 in the morning every day, but they've been married for 40 years. And it's just like, you get to know somebody. And when the final exam came around, I needed to get an 86, I think, or an 85 on the final. And I remember I took the final. I thought I did great. I was like, yeah, I crushed it. And I looked at the final exam grade. I got an 83, and my heart dropped for like a second. And then I looked at my final grade, and he gave me a B plus. And it was kind of that moment where I was like, wow, you know, just really allowing myself to kind of just be like, you know, maybe there's something to actually sitting down and getting to know a person, and not just telling him that you need the grades to get into this thing or get to this next place, and kind of putting your trust in those people to kind of help you along the way, and things maybe being a little bit lucky. But
yeah, in this situation, it was both the grades you make and the hands you shake.
Yeah, I mean,
there.
That's gonna happen, man. But you know, yeah,
it's all part of it. It's all part. I mean, I guess I know we've been chatting for a while here. The other question I have for you, and even someone in my shoes, I always think about this and kind of run I'm a student of my calendar, if you will, just to try to figure out how to optimize my days. In your seat, you're busy working at Yext, you're running your startups, you're enjoying life with your girlfriend. How do you balance all of that and staying up to date, whether it would be with the sports you care about or your family or working out, whatever it is? How are you going about balancing and staying as even keel as you are?
You know, I really try to just place a lot of that emphasis on the people I work with. Kind of like we talked about it, like the people I work with right now at Yext. Like, I mean, my boss is the man. I mean, he puts a lot of trust into me, and like we've had this conversation about like, you know, I am working on something on the side, and I want to state that, like, you know, I make sure to keep that all outside of work, right? Because I have a lot of respect for these people, and their time is as valuable as mine. So if I'm not getting my work done and I'm holding them up, then that's on me. Like that is a poor reflection of who I am. So I always try to prioritize that, right? Like this is the company that I love working at. I love these people. And as far as like, you know, just my day-to-day outside of it, I got to give my girlfriend so much credit. I am such a pain in the ass sometimes. I mean, you know, like I just never stop. Like, and I think like the best part about that is she kind of knows that. And she's very like, she knows how to handle me in these situations, but more importantly, she pushes me to do this. Like when she sees that I have an idea or I have something, she's not just like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. She's like, let's explore this. You know, how do you want to go about this? Who are you going to talk to? You know, you got this. Before my Y Combinator interview, she was hyping me up before that. And I think, you know, she's a phenomenal partner. And it kind of falls back to that, right? Where I'm allowed that space to explore these ideas and explore, you know, my love of sports on Sundays, you know, so like I go to my buddy's house every Sundays for football, and, you know, I know she hates that, but it's a nice tradition. It's a nice thing for me just to kind of decompress and relax. And I think a lot of it is just kind of, yeah, it's prioritizing and knowing those relationships that are valuable and, you know, kind of planning your life around those people and not necessarily those goals. Right. And, you know, making sure that, yeah, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense to me. And well, I know like I said, we've been chatting for a while here. I want to be mindful of your time on a get into a busy week here, but we'll have to just open the floor for you. Any closing thoughts you might have? Hopefully we'll be able to get together here in person, either New York or DC soon, but floor is yours for any closing thoughts you have for the audience here.
Yeah, no, I mean, my closing thoughts is I'll center it around entrepreneurship. You know, I write down every idea you have, you know, and don't think that you can't go after them. And I think the last piece, I'll always say this, is you don't need to build the next $1 billion startup. Like, you know, I think in startups, and especially everyone who's building it is expected to kind of say, my idea is the next Uber, it's the next this. And if you're not, then what's the point, right? It's boring. And I think that's toxic, man. Like I love what I do because I feel like I'm solving a problem that I originally set out to solve for myself, right? And my friends and my family. Like, you know, it's not something that I thought was going to break the world and disrupt everything. And I think that, you know, it's never thinking too small. You never know what it's going to become. But if you have an idea and you have an inclination and you have a passion, like, go and explore that. Like, don't limit yourself. You don't have to do that. So yeah, I'm super thankful for the people in my life that give me that avenue. And I'll always thank my parents who gave me that kind of drive and kicked it all off.
I couldn't agree more and couldn't resonate with that more. I'm really excited for your journey ahead. Excited to see where Hooli or wherever your next venture goes, or even if it's just a nice corporate life, if that's what the end all be all is for us. I'm excited to see how that pans out. Like I said, hopefully we can link up here in New York or DC soon, and I'll be sure to plug your socials and all of the relevant links in the show notes. But really appreciate your time, and it was so good to catch up. Long overdue. And Tarek, I appreciate you joining today.
And Arjan, man, this is a phenomenal forum, and I really appreciate you having me on. And I can't wait to listen to the next people you have coming on here. I think this is such a fun and just engaging time, and I'm really excited for you, man. This podcast is awesome.
Thanks, Tarek. You're the man. Appreciate it.
Later.